Brought to you by Disney and Pixar's Inside Out 2. Nominated for a Golden Globe and a Critics' Choice Award for Best Animated Feature. Screen Rant hails Inside Out 2 is the most important movie of the year. And the New York Times says it's an unparalleled tool to help people understand themselves. Disney and Pixar's Inside Out 2 for your consideration in all categories, including Best Animated Feature. Hi, everyone. Today, I'm reuniting with my old colleague, Vanity Fair's chief film critic, Richard Lawson, and we're going to talk about the deluge of movies opening in this holiday period. Some of them have Oscar hopes, and some of them don't necessarily. After that, I'll share my conversation with someone who has a whole lot to celebrate this year as it comes to a close. Glen Powell, he's the star of Twisters, and as well as the Golden Globe-nominated star of Hit Man. I'm Katey Rich, and this is the Prestige Chunky Podcast. So, Richard, first of all, I feel like you're a very long overdue guest on this podcast. I've reunited with our other Little Gold Men colleagues here, so I'm just glad you're here. I promise it was not a wait for any reason. I just had to wait for a bunch of good movies to talk about.
Yeah, critic end of the year. It seems to fit, I think.
Yeah, you're here to critique everything we've done so far this year and what we didn't accomplish.
Bad year. That's my review.
Yeah, well, so I was going to ask you, I was looking at your top, you published a top 22, I guess, which I appreciate getting outside the lines of the top 10. But that was kind of a couple weeks ago at this point. So you've really been able to let the dust settle. You've voted in your critics group. Like, how are you feeling about 2024 as it comes to a close?
I was talking about this with someone recently, and I was like, yeah, I guess if you really liked The Substance and loved The Brutalist, et cetera, it was a great year. I'm just not one of those people. I think I was mixed on a lot of things that people were really high up on, and then high on some things that were smaller or other people didn't really like. I mean, I have the Anne Hathaway movie, The Idea of You, on my top 22 list. I was considering putting the Blake Lively movie, It Ends With Us, on my list. So maybe my taste is just divergent this year in some ways.
Do you feel like it's a bad year for any reason? Obviously, it just varies, especially when we're talking about independently produced films. You don't necessarily know when they're going to come out. Do you see any kind of broader cause for it?
I think for me, honestly, I think there are certain trends in filmmaking, or let's say mainstream American filmmaking, that some people seem really into and I'm less so. I didn't really go for Long Legs or Love Lies Bleeding or some of the other quote-unquote prestige horror, really The Substance even. I loved Demi Moore in that movie, but the movie itself didn't work entirely for me. So I think, again, it's been feast for some. I'm just sort of, for whatever reason, out of sync with this year in movies.
Yeah.
But there were plenty of great things to rave about, so I shouldn't really complain too much.
Yeah, we'll get into one of those. We're not going to say elevated horror. We're past that phrase. But prestige horror offerings, there's one big one to close the year out. So yeah, before we start getting into just a bunch of these titles that are coming out, a lot of which you reviewed, I think one is on your top 22. Why is it that Christmas gets so crazy? This is a historical thing that happens, but it always feels like every year you think that you've got a grip on all the awards movies specifically, and then you're like, wait, Hard Truths came in and out of theaters already? December is just mayhem, and this Christmas is really no different.
Yeah, I think that we're in this weird transition era where the old model of release is not really working, but some people are still adhering to it. Others are kind of experimenting with let's put it out in February or March or whatever versus, holding it for a very crowded fall. I think the biggest change you've seen is that July 4th used to be such a huge tentpole programming date and now really isn't.
Yeah.
But Christmas holds out, I think, for a couple obvious reasons. People are home with their families and probably would like to get out of the house and not have to talk to people for a couple hours. And I also think it's just a season of spending money. So you're like, well, why not?
What's another $20?
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to celebrate Christmas to be in that kind of mindset. But I like it. I think it's the big release window that I get most excited about each year, I think.
Yeah. Well, and last year we had, a Christmas release that pattern's happened a few times where the Iron Claw opens at Christmas and everyone's like, I don't know. It just kind of came and went and then kind of slowly just kept making money. I just looked back at it, made $35 million, which for a movie of that size, it is that sad, is pretty impressive. So do you feel like there's someone who's trying to go after that pattern this year?
That's a great question. I think you have movies like A Complete Unknown, the Timothée Chalamet starring Bob Dylan biopic. maybe even like Nosferatu, a very counter-programmy kind of movie that I'm sure, like, yeah, we hope to make some money on Christmas, but we also hope that we linger into theaters and kind of become a January hit like American Sniper, or really even Titanic. We think of Titanic as a 1997 movie. It made most of its money in 1998.
I saw it many times in theaters in 1998, as many of us did. I was right there. So before we get into maybe some of the potential sleepers on the awards movies, like just like big, giant box office wise, December 20th, which is, as we record this, just a few days away. It'll be in the past as people hear this. It's bringing both Sonic 3 and Mufasa, kind of the clash of the CGI titans. You've seen Mufasa, but not Sonic 3, right?
Yeah, Sonic 3 is a little too photorealistic for me. It kind of creeps me out.
Even after they fix the teeth, you still can't get on board.
No, I'm talking about James Marsden. He's in that, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Sonic, I mean, I played the video games as a kid, but those movies, I think, to me, just seemed so squarely for children that I was like, whatever.
I will probably wind up seeing Sonic 3. I'll report back, but have yet to see it myself.
Apparently, they're kind of good. So
I've seen the first one and I liked it fine. I mean, remember James Marsden made that Russell Brand Easter Bunny movie a while ago? And then like this one, he's kind of perfected the like, I'm the real person with the CGI character thing. So, I got nothing against Sonic.
He's the new Jason Lee.
He's making that Chipmunks money. Yeah. Good for you, James Marsden. But you did see Mufasa, which I do think is more prestigious in many ways than Sonic anyway.
It's certainly going for that, Yeah. I mean, it's really kind of touting itself both in the marketing, but also kind of in the text of the film as this great rumbling, kind of Shakespearean story. I mean, the original film is, of course, based on Hamlet. Yeah. This is a prequel, and I don't really know you can prequelize Hamlet, but they try, and they have songs by Lin-Manuel Miranda, and it feels very high grade. This is top shelf stuff. But
it's directed by an Oscar-winning director, which might be hard to know if you've only seen the trailers.
That's right, Barry Jenkins, who Avast will insist this was a labor of love. It was not just a paycheck project. Yep. And you see glimmers of his talent, his obvious talent in the movie. But for the most part, it is an exercise in corporate, IP expansion.
Yeah. So as corporate IP expansion exercises go, like how is it?
I didn't really like it, I got to be honest. I mean, I think that the bar for me liking it was pretty high to begin with because
because you saw the quote-unquote live-action Lion King that this is the sequel to in 2019.
Never seen it. Nope.
Me neither.
Nope.
Somehow I avoided it.
Lion King came out when I was like 11. But I was such a devotee to Little Mermaid and kind of Beauty and the Beast that I saw Lion King. I liked it. I maybe watched it one or two more times, but that was kind of it. Like it wasn't a huge part of my...
you somehow. Wow.
Yeah. It's weird how that can happen sometimes. So it's just not in my DNA the way it is, I think, for some people and now their children. But I think the big problem is for me that like you're watching the story about Mufasa and his adoptive brother Taka, who later becomes Scar, and they're little cubs and they're so cute and their friendship kind of blooms over the years. And the whole time you're like, but that one's going to kill the other one. And it just feels, I don't mind a dark, element to children's films at all, but it's kind of depressing, honestly. And I think that the movie just can't shake that no matter how it tries to kind of rejigger the narrative in a bit of retconning.
Yeah, I mean, the hopes for Mufasa awards-wise have always been kind of fuzzy. Like, it's not really an animated film, but it's not a live-action film. But the songs are the thing that we've all been looking for from Lin-Manuel Miranda. And the thing that has surprised me about it is that for Critics' Choice and Golden Globe nominations where, they have these song categories, that they didn't put those songs out there at all. They didn't really try to get any of that. So are the songs not even going to be Oscar contenders?
I can't really single one out that would be. I mean, I don't hear a Circle of Life in there. I don't hear a Can You Feel the Love Tonight in there. There's a really weird villain song. The Scar villain song, Be Prepared, is great in the original Lion King. Yeah. This one involves Mads Mikkelsen constantly singing the phrase "go bye-bye" as a euphemism for death. And it just does not work.
That is odd. Do they rise above the level of Moana 2, where those poor songwriters have famously been called to task for not being Lin-Manuel Miranda?
You can hear the Miranda-isms in it, yes, but it definitely doesn't feel like. I think the original Moana was a brand new thing. It was an original creation, and I think Miranda was inspired by that. I think it's harder for him to shoehorn his style into something that has to kind of satisfy all of these, now 30-year-old narrative needs.
Yeah, I mean, even with you have Encanto and Moana, you've got these original stories. Like, there's so much baggage with The Lion King. I didn't think about that part of it.
Yeah, Miranda was able to help shape Moana's kind of whole identity. And in this case, he's just kind of a writer for hire.
Yeah. Well, if anyone can take their kids to Mufasa and drop them off and duck next door to go see something else, I guess you can't get away with The Brutalist because it's the length of probably 3 Mufasas.
Yeah.
But maybe Baby Girl, which
Sure.
according to Box Office Mojo, as I'm looking at it, is opening wide on December 20th, which is maybe it's going to work. It's an A24 film. It's small. It's sexy in all these ways. But I mean, don't you think Nicole Kidman, A24 sex movie set at Christmas might be a good sell?
I hope so. I mean, I think that's really fun counter-programming. A24 has been bullish on this movie, since it premiered at Venice. They always had this December date in mind for release, and I hope it pays off because it does take place over Christmas, the movie does. And I think it's the perfect thing for parents while their kids see something else, or just, people over the age of whatever who just want to see something kind of fun and sexy that isn't your typical Christmas movie.
Yeah. I'm imagining like if you are staying home for Christmas and you're young and you have you're in a new relationship and you guys can go see Baby Girl together, like who knows what kind of fun things might emerge after that.
There you go. Or if you're like the cool kid who's coming home from their first year of college and is like, I'm going to go see a grown-up movie. And then everyone else goes to see, I don't know, whatever else. Mufasa.
Yeah, go reunite with your college friends and see Baby Girl and talk about how cool you are. I mean, where did you land on Baby Girl overall? Like, I more find Nicole Kidman and Harris Dickinson and Antonio Banderas, I should say. He's really great in the supporting part. The draw more than the movie itself, which I think is like well made but kind of straightforward. Where do you land on it?
Pretty much the same as you.
Okay.
I think the performances are great. I think it looks really good. I think there are very clever scenes. But my big issue was, for all the kind of whispers about it before I saw it in Venice and then everything since, like the way people talk about the movie, I'm like, I don't think it's that transgressive. I don't actually think it's that risque. I mean, yes, there are a couple scenes where you're like, okay, this is interesting for a wide release film that's coming out on Christmas. But, there have been way, way more risque films made even many years ago. So I think that aspect of it didn't really catch on for me.
You don't think the glass of milk T-shirt is really capturing the zeitgeist?
Maybe. Well, we'll see. It depends on how the movie does, I guess.
To go awards-wise for a second, I mean, Nicole Kidman, she's been nominated for many Oscars. She's usually assumed to be part of the conversation until she's not. She missed the Critics' Choice nomination for Baby Girl, which doesn't necessarily tell you anything about the Oscars one way or another. But where are you on her Oscar chances here?
Well, I think she has a good chance of winning the Golden Globe. Mm-hmm. Not a sure bet.
She's in the drama category, which is less crowded than musical comedy this year. Yeah,
exactly. And I think the problem with Oscar is that it's just a traffic jam in that category. By my count, there are like 8, 9 potential contenders and only 5 slots. And so 4 people are going to miss out. And I think she could easily be one of them. I think if the movie performs very well and becomes a kind of Saltburn-y, I mean, not that Saltburn didn't make that much money, but it was a big viral hit. And I think if Baby Girl can kind of repeat that and make money, then she'll kind of be undeniably in the conversation. But there's also the possibility that it just doesn't, kind of make a mark enough for Nicole to be able to compete with these 8 other contenders.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of us have really gotten our hopes up. Like, what if Baby Girl just makes money? Like, what if it does Iron Claw and like just plays? Like, what it would be great for all of us as like people who like movies that are for grown-ups, and also great for A24.
Yeah, for sure. And, Netflix had a movie, I think it was last year, called Fair Play with Alden Ehrenreich and Phoebe Dynevor. I thought that was kind of in the same vein, sexy. That was more of a thriller, Fair Play was. And I kind of had hoped that would make a big splash. And maybe it did well on Netflix, but that movie to me mostly seemed to come and go. I'm a little worried that the same will be true of Baby Girl, but Baby Girl does have Nicole Kidman and it's theatrical release. So it already has a bit more heft than Fair Play ever did. Yeah,
I feel like you were a real champion of that movie. I forgot all about it. I am a huge fan of The Brutalist. I think you are less so. Not like anti-brutalist, I don't think. But I don't want to have to fight about The Brutalist here in this Christmas time.
I think The Brutalist, the first half is extraordinary. I think that score, the performances, everything's really working on a thematic level. I think the second half it feels to me watching it that Corbet is having trouble arriving at a point or figuring out what his point is until the very end coda. Mm-hmm. And then you're like, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of that woven throughout that second half.
Yeah. I mean, you're certainly not the only person who feels that way. When I saw it a second time, which is a crazy thing to do, to see that movie twice on a big screen, but I felt like the second half kind of cemented for me, the idea of this rise and fall of the American dream. But I think it's going to be an interesting thing for it throughout the season, right? Like it's this big, bold movie, like it's getting nominations all over the place, but are people going to hold themselves back from loving it because of the way that the second half goes?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think that in some ways you could look at that admirably. He kind of puts the crescendo of his film in the first part, and then the second part is the more ruminative, like dark half. And so that's certainly an artistic risk. And for me, it didn't quite pay off, but I worry that, you can't do that many showtimes in theaters because it's so long. As a screener, I watched it once in theaters, once at home, and the home experience was, I'll be honest, a lot of pausing, checking my phone.
Yeah.
I really took advantage of the intermission, and I worry that it might not grab a hold of people the way that it did, at the Venice premiere or whatever.
Yeah, they're doing an interesting job eventizing it, like having these IMAX bookings. It's not quite a road show, but they're trying to make each of the screening of it an event, which, a year after Oppenheimer with Interstellar going and making a huge amount of money on IMAX is like a pretty good strategy.
I hope to see a spike in Google's, much like we did with Tar, of like, who is Laszlo Toth? And then people like myself at Venice find out, oh, it's not a real guy.
I would love for Cate Blanchett and Adrian Brody to like sit down for an actors on actors, be like, so playing a fake historical person is fun, right?
Tar on Toth.
Yes, you figured it out. Okay, so to move on to Christmas Day, we've got a couple of wide releases going out on Christmas itself. Actually, hang on, let me take it back. We really just have one major release going out on Christmas Day. I thought A Complete Unknown would be opening wide because why wouldn't it? It's like a big Bob Dylan biopic. But it looks like Nosferatu is the only really big old wide release, which, again, kind of like Baby Girl at Christmas. That's a flex. Like, you go get it, Focus Features.
Yeah.
And yeah, you have not published a review of this as we're speaking, but we'll be out there when people hear this. And it sounds like people have really been going for Nosferatu as this kind of like gothic Christmassy thing, and it grabbed you a little bit less.
Yeah, I mean, look, Eggers makes undeniably beautiful looking movies, and the soundscape is, appropriately oppressive. And there's a lot of impressive, interesting things in that film. But I think the narrative for me just gets very repetitive. And you're kind of like a lot of characters, lurching up in bed and saying, he's coming. And after the 8th scene of that, you're like, could he just get here already? And I just, I love the nervy risk of saying, yep, we're going to go wide on Christmas. We're following the girl with the dragon tattoo strategy of being the anti-Christmas movie.
Yeah.
I just think this one is not entertaining enough.
I will say I'm happy with the way Nosferatu has landed in award season stuff where like no one's trying to be like Lily Rose Depp for Best Actress. Like Bill Skarsgård, I guess he'd be Best Actor as Nosferatu is the titular role. It's being kind of appreciated as this genre effort that it is, not to like dismiss the accomplishment of it, but I feel like that's exactly where it belongs. Like it is this interesting holiday experiment to go dark for the holidays, and it's okay for it to land there.
Yeah, look, and it certainly could be a contender in some craft categories, and I think that would be great because the craft is pretty unimpeachable.
Yeah, no, it's so gorgeous. And like just the fact that Robert Eggers like gets the money to make these things, like I don't really get how he gets away with it, but it's impressive.
Well, especially because The Northman didn't make that much money.
No.
And that was their big springtime gamble of speaking of things based on Hamlet, or I guess that's based on the story that pre-existed Hamlet.
Yeah, like Buzz Lightyear is based on the story of the real guy.
Right, exactly. Hamlet is the toy that Andy played with. But yeah, I mean, The Northman, it did fine, and people seem to like it, I guess, but like, it's just interesting that they just doubled down on him and were like, all right, here's more money for a Christmas vampire movie.
Well, he's like building up this kind of fan base. Like he and Ari Aster are kind of these interesting like twin torchbearers for not the like long legs cuckoo horror thing, but kind of a different thing. Like they've kind of invented this subgenre and are making it work really well. Yeah,
I mean, I think Beau is Afraid in the case of Aster was a bit of a divergence from his previous two films, but like I think that Eggers and Aster alike, like I appreciate that they are sticking in genre to some extent. They didn't use the springboard of these interesting little horror movies to then go make their, I don't know, There Will Be Blood or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so then A Complete Unknown, not in fact opening wide, but will be everywhere. I've been seeing ads for it kind of nonstop. Timothée Chalamet's been a guest picker on College Game Day. Like, you cannot miss this man absolutely everywhere. I saw it kind of late, and I generally liked it a lot. Like I was talking to someone else who was saying that like men over 40 tend to love it more, which who could possibly be shocked by that, as opposed to women who are like, maybe there's a few too many shots of women watching him in awe as he plays music. I don't know where you land on that in general. I feel like we've all kind of accepted like this is Timothée Chalamet's moment, but other than him, where did A Complete Unknown land for you?
Well, I'll tell you this, parents over 70 love it because my folks certainly did. I was able to show them a screener when I was home for Thanksgiving. I'm sorry for stealing that box office money from you, studio.
Yeah, my father-in-law will be here in a few days, and it's on the list.
Yeah. I had gone to see it a couple days before I was home for Thanksgiving, and the fact that I watched it twice in 1 week should speak to my thoughts on it.
Yeah.
Because I went in dragging my heels. I was like,
Sure.
oh, here we go. Another music biopic about some baby boomer fascination. Who the hell cares? But I was like, okay, I guess I'll see it for Chalamet and for work. And I kind of was just swept away by it pretty immediately. I think he's so great. That music is pretty much undeniable. And the way that the music is really centered in that movie, I mean, it is mostly a music movie, a performance movie. I just thought that worked so well.
Yeah, I mean, every time he starts playing a song in that movie, you're like, oh my God, this is the greatest song I've ever heard in my life. And like, obviously these are Bob Dylan songs that are like kind of famous, but it makes them feel new. And then I just didn't know that a music movie could do that. I don't really know how they pull it off other than the performance, but they really nailed something that I feel like in so many music biopics, you're like, okay, now we're going to hear the song that made Johnny Cash famous, like to talk about a James Mangold movie. And this one just has so much freshness to it.
Well, I think they're also kind of, in a cheeky way, a little bit offhanded with some of the songs. Like he's singing Blowin' in the Wind in this very casual, almost like little throwaway scene, you know, and then they center some other maybe slightly lesser known songs instead. I just think that it feels very carefully curated and calibrated and is the product of, you know, I think Chalamet and Mangold worked on the film for about 5 years, getting Chalamet to the point where he really could do that performance. And I think that time and patience paid off.
He's really amazing in this movie. And like, I think a lot of we're like, oh, you know, Call Me By Your Name. He's such a fresh star. Like that was 6 years ago. Like he's been out here for a while. But he's kind of growing up into something in this movie. Like between this and Dune, he's really shouldering a lot. And like, this is not an easy role to play in any way, even though everyone's got a Dylan impression in their back pocket. And I just was kind of swept away by him the whole time.
Yeah. And I think Monica Barbaro as Joan Baez does a great job. Elle Fanning is really good in a sort of tricky character where she is really the person standing in awe or anger as she watches Dylan. And Edward Norton as Pete Seeger. Like, what a funny, curious little ray of sunshine performance that is, kind of darkened a little bit by, you know, sort of some conservative leanings in there. But like, I just think that's such a great winning performance and kind of came out of nowhere to be a sudden, I think, supporting actor contender. Yeah,
like he's playing just like a really nice man who just wants everyone to like spread the love of folk music and it like cannot handle at all the like future that Bob Dylan is bringing. And like just the idea of like a mentor-mentee relationship and like when you build someone up and then they don't become quite what you want them to be. Like that's a really complicated thing to get at in a movie about an artist. And I can't think of other great examples of it. Like what a fascinating thing to bring out there.
Well, and it does it without any big, you know, argument scene or monologue or anything. Yes. It's really subtle. And I think that's appreciated. I also like that Norton and the writing do take a little bit of time to be like, yes, what a lovely, kind man, but isn't that a little annoying too? You know, like there's a little hair of kind of just irritation in there. And I think that's really crucial to the performance.
Yes. I will say, I agree with you that Monica Barbaro is great as Joan Baez. I think the movie deserved to do a little bit more by her. Like she's established as the star. You kind of see how she brings Bob Dylan on stage with her. She helps build him up, but there's just not that much about her that's not in the context of him. And the movie's about him. And I get that, but it's still, you know, what she's bringing to that. I felt like I could have gotten a little bit more Joan Baez from the movie overall.
There's a two-hander biopic in there, you know, about their careers. And I think that the movie, A Complete Unknown, does get at this a little bit toward the end, but doesn't develop it about like, Dylan's narrative in the movie is about like, I just can't do the same thing twice. I have to keep
Mm-hmm.
evolving. And Baez wants to keep evolving, but it's like, but I also understand that people want to hear these songs that they love. And part of my job as an artist is to give them that. And I think those are two totally valid ways to look at creativity. And the clash between that is there in the film, but could have been expanded on.
Yeah. Am I remembering correctly that you made the call that Chalamet's going to win Best Actor?
I have made that call as of this recording. But
when you back off your Best Actor calls and then you regret them, so stand by it.
Yeah, no, I just think there's enough there between the baby boomer nostalgia, the singing performance, the vocal transformation, the love of Chalamet. He had a big year with Dune 2, and now this, and you know, football picks and whatever the hell else he's doing. Like, I think he has charmed enough people that he will join Adrian Brody in being a 29-year-old Best Actor winner.
Wow, I didn't even put together that he's the same age that Brody was. It's fascinating. Okay, we got a couple more movies to get to before we wrap up. And I'm not sure that Better Man is going to be considered a Christmas movie since it's opening wider in January. And also in America, will anyone know who Robbie Williams is and why there's a movie about him? Did you see Better Man?
I have not seen it. It's the last big holdout, but I'm going to see it soon.
It is a fascinating object in every way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they spent a lot of money on it. Mm-hmm. And part of that money is because Robbie Williams is played by a CGI ape, correct?
He absolutely is. He sure is.
And if a Robbie Williams biopic wasn't already alienating enough to Americans, here's this bizarre added element that, yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I think the comp for that, and for obvious reasons, is The Greatest Showman. It's directed by Michael Gracie, who directed The Greatest Showman. That movie opened at Christmas and no one knew what to make of it. And then you blinked and it had made $200 million. So who knows? I enjoyed it a lot. I saw it in Toronto and kind of came out of it being like, as a strange object, I had a great time with it. So I'm intrigued to see what happens with it.
People I know who've seen it like it, genuinely think it's a pretty well done movie. And it seems that the powers that be agreed because Gracie just got hired to do the Tangled movie.
Oh, I didn't even see that. Wow. Congratulations to him. And then there's one smaller movie I wanted to ask you about that I didn't barely know anything, but it was on your best movies of the year list, Vermiglio.
Yeah.
What is Vermiglio?
It's an Italian film from the director Maura Del Pero. It premiered at Venice, fittingly. And it's this really hushed but visually stunning look at a small town way up in the Italian Alps at the very end of World War II and how they're affected when a Sicilian soldier trying to make his way very slowly home from the front stops in their town for a bit and kind of affects the lives, particularly of one family run by the local school teacher. Bad things happen, some sweet things happen. Not a ton of big stuff happens, but I just found it really arresting and a really interesting study of time and place, particularly World War II, which has very often been depicted in film, but rarely kind of the home front stuff. Like, what was it like to be in Europe, but not on the front lines, just kind of existing during that time? And I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, the description of like small stuff happens and big stuff kind of reminds me of All We Imagine Is Light, which has gotten a little bit more attention on the international film circuit this year. But kind of those small, minutely detailed character studies can have such power when you see them in this award season context.
They really can. And, I would say if Vermiglio happens to be playing at some art house local to wherever your listener is, go see it on the big screen because those shots of the mountains, I mean, it'll make you want to book a flight immediately. It's so beautiful.
Yeah. Okay, one last title to get to, and I can't tell how big release this is going to be, but The Fire Inside, co-written by Barry Jenkins, director of Mufasa. One interesting wrinkle about it. It's got Brian Tyree Henry. It's a real story of Clarissa Shields, a boxer from Flint. I saw it in Toronto. I thought the performances were more interesting than the film itself. Where are you on The Fire Inside?
Yeah, I think I would agree. I mean, I think The Fire Inside was at Toronto, as you said, but also there was Unstoppable, a wrestling kind of drama with Jennifer Lopez, not playing the wrestler, by the way. And I think those two were kind of not about the same sport, but about similar sports. And I would say of the two, watching The Fire Inside, you're like, oh, this is an interesting way to approach this well-worn genre. It's not doing anything crazy and, outside the box, but like it's just really sturdy in what it is. And I think that's really in large part to Ryan Destiny in the lead and then Brian Tyree Henry, who... It's weird that we haven't had as much chatter about his supporting actor chances as I think there should be. Yeah. But maybe people are just slow in catching up to that movie.
Well, and if there's anything we've learned is that Brian Tyree Henry in a supporting role in a movie that's not getting that much attention can show up out of nowhere. So we'll see if he pulls a Causeway again.
Yeah, exactly. The Causeway story was fascinating to watch unfold, and so maybe we'll have that again this year. I also say about Fire Inside, boy, is it nice when a cinematographer makes a movie. Not always, but sometimes, because that movie is beautiful. Rachel Morrison did not do the cinematography, but I'm sure she was a voice in that.
Yeah, you get that feel from it, and it's not like it's so showy and flashy. It just really elevates what's happening in it.
Yeah. And I hope it makes some money because I think that sort of middle of the road, mid-budget kind of thing, like inspiring or depressing sports story, like we used to have a lot more of those. And it would be nice if we could reignite that tradition.
Yeah, for the people who feel like Bob Dylan is just not of interest to them at all, Fire Inside is another really right down the middle option you've got over the holidays.
Yeah, and easy for the whole family to watch, honestly.
Yeah, maybe a little bit less perplexing than Better Man.
Yeah.
Anyways, so to wrap it up, Richard, of anything that we've talked about, is there anything you're really rooting for? Like if in January comes and that movie's done well, you'll feel like we're in an okay place as a people.
I mean, I think the baby girl thing would be fun. I think we've had a lot of movies like that in recent years that have been sort of viral and sort of cool and kicky, and A24 and the kids on Letterboxd are into it, But not a lot of those have actually made enough money to bring that mid-budget kind of thing back in a big way. So I hope that Baby Girl wildly outperforms Saltburn and whatever else you could compare it to, because I just want more like that. I think that's the thing about Baby Girl that has kind of not puzzled me, but sort of, kind of frustrated me in a sort of resigned way of like, it used to be that a movie like that didn't have to have all this award stuff hung on it.
Yeah,
it was just a fun, sexy kind of thriller comedy, and that was enough. And I would love to get back to a place where we're not so shocked by something like that we're like, I don't know, I guess have these awards.
Yeah, and that we made so many of those in the 90s, and they were all sexist in one level or another. So if Baby Girl can kick off the wave of them made by women in some way that doesn't have them all as like Fatal Attraction level demons, that would be a great move also.
Exactly. I mean, you go back and watch any of those like early 90s thrillers, even the kind of B grade ones, and it's like score by Hans Zimmer, cinematography by some, Polish master. And you're like, geez, they used to put a lot of thought and effort into these things.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think maybe the one, my rooting horse is still Nosferatu, even though it's got, Robert Eggers is like going to do fine no matter what. But I think holiday counter programming is just such a fun thing to do. Like, don't just give it over to the most obvious multiplex stuff. Open it wide, let people like have their hair blown back, go see the silent version. Maybe like it's out there. You probably watch it on YouTube. So I would like to see that one succeed too.
Absolutely. I mean, really, I'm at the point where I want every movie to do well.
Well, look, Moana 2 is out there breaking records. So you've got what you wanted. That's the only movie in America that matters anymore.
More sequels. Yay.
Yeah, there you go. Richard, thank you. This was a delight. We will reunite again soon. And everyone should go read your top 22 list for more ideas of great movies they can watch.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, and happy holidays.
So I'm going to take a quick break, and then I'll be back with my conversation with Glen Powell. Brought to you by Disney and Pixar's Inside Out 2. Nominated for a Golden Globe and a Critics' Choice Award for Best Animated Feature. Screen Rant hails Inside Out 2 is the most important movie of the year. And the New York Times says it's an unparalleled tool to help people understand themselves. Disney and Pixar's Inside Out 2, for your consideration in all categories, including Best Animated Feature. It is a very funny thing to get Glen Powell on the line and ask him a question that is deceptively simple, like, how has your year been? Because Glen Powell has been pretty much the undisputed breakout star of 2024. It started at the end of last year with his rom-com Anyone But You, and then led into this summer's blockbuster Twisters, as well as Hit Man, which he co-wrote with director Richard Linklater in addition to playing the lead. So when I talked to Glen Powell, he was settling in for a full year of production in London. He's going to be first making a remake of The Running Man with Edgar Wright, and then he's on an upcoming J.J. Abrams project. He was talking to me from the kitchen of his London home. It's very nice, I promise. And it makes it clear that this year of Glen Powell we've had is probably going to turn into a decade plus of Glen Powell. It's not only because he's this kind of classic movie star that we thought we couldn't make anymore, but he's also taking charge of his own destiny by co-writing something as clever and awards buzzy as Hit Man. So I talked to him about the process of working on that script with Linklater back during the COVID lockdowns before he even knew that Top Gun Maverick was really going to change his life. We talked about how they know together when they've got a good idea, and then what he learned from the business after getting Hit Man picked up by Netflix, getting it made with Richard Linklater, who's a veteran, and then seeing it out in the world. He's had this moment of quote-unquote sudden fame these past few years, but he also toiled for over a decade in obscurity and has some really interesting perspective on the business as a result. I really can't think of a better way to wrap up the year than by listening to this conversation with Glen Powell. So, Glen, when people hear this, it's going to be about the end of the year when this episode airs. And so if you don't mind putting yourself in the headspace of, yourself as of December, how's your year been? How do you feel about how 2024 has gone for you?
It's been a really surreal one. It's been hard to describe. I have constant check-ins with my parents and my family about it, just in terms of the amount of changes that have happened and these surreal calls that have come in and opportunities and things like that. And especially when it comes to your family, people that have seen you from the beginning who know that every small victory in Hollywood, it feels monumental because it's just so hard to beat the odds. That just kind of being in this year in which just a lot of, I've just been the beneficiary of just a lot of really great fortune and great opportunities and working with your heroes. But it's been surreal. It's been really surreal. And just making sure I appreciate all of it, which I do. There are several moments along this journey that have just been unexpected. You just never know how far this ride's going to take you, but it's taken me a lot further than I thought. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I was wondering about where you were about this time last year, where like Anyone But You was coming out, just gotten past the strikes, so like all this crazy existential stuff. And when you realize that, Hit Man was scheduled for that June release, it was going to come right before Twisters, like taking stock of what the year was going to hold. Did you have like a minute? Are you like a end of the year assessment kind of person where you're like, okay, what's ahead? Not like even resolutions, just like kind of figuring out what's ahead for you, especially knowing that you'd had these two movies that would really take up a lot of your time.
Yeah, I think you can never plot too far ahead. I think what you can do is you can always chase things that get you excited and collaborators that get you excited, living in worlds and things like that. But in terms of like the success and failure of it, Anyone But You at the end of last year, what was really interesting is Anyone But You is like, so the strikes happened. I was shooting Twisters at the time. During the strike, we had an opportunity, depending on when the strikes ended, Sydney and I had an opportunity to do some reshoots on Anyone But You that we really, really wanted to do. Basically, the day the strike ended, we were on a flight back to Australia to do those reshoots. We shot those things. We put them in the movie, retested the movie. It was really wonderful. The movie played great.
I think the weather was still
It
right.
was
Like it was summer in
crazy.
Australia still.
I mean,
Lucky you.
everything about it was like kind of hard to believe. So we shot for a few days down there. And then, the other part about the movie is that the movie came out and it kind of came out to crickets, and I remember
It was a weird time of year.
It was a weird time of year. And, I think it was right around Christmas and a really hard time to open a movie like that. But what was really fascinating is, again, just sort of trusting in the longer journey. And again, like the 2024 has been a very unexpected year, but just the journey of Anyone But You, a movie that people sort of wrote off and said, yeah, that's why it didn't open or whatever. And then all of a sudden it's just the little engine that could. Every weekend we just kind of kept making money and we kind of kept consistent and people kept showing up. And, you saw the amount of happiness it brought audience members dancing out of the cinemas, and it kind of went viral in this wonderful way. And it really became like an audience favorite. And the way that people cheered it on was just its own magical journey, that was like a surreal, emotional experience on its own to kind of come out of the gates and people have sort of the natural reaction to that, and to watch how people had a strong reaction of like, sort of, I told you so. And then we got to come around the other side and sort of say the same thing. It's just Hollywood never dishes out what you think it'll dish you out when and how. It's always very unexpected, but that's been the really fun part about this year. It's really a hard time to have successes in this business. And so it's not lost on me that this year I've had 3 movies I'm really, really proud of, including Hit Man, which is another movie that Richard Linklater and I put so much love into. But we made that movie completely independently, and that was an unexpected journey where not a lot of people believed in that movie. And then we were able to show it at the festivals, and it sort of, people gravitated towards it and really championed it and loved it. And then sort of the feeling on the other side was crazy.
Like I got to see Hit Man at Toronto when it premiered, but it was during the strikes, and you weren't there as far as I know. You stuck in the back door.
Definitely was not there. No.
So there was just this phenomenal audience experience happening with this movie. And, it had a theatrical release. I imagine most people encountered it on Netflix. So, like, what was that like for you, knowing that this thing you had worked so hard on was just hitting really hard, and then trying to shepherd it across, 9 months later or whatever when it premiered, to try to recapture some of that and make sure people could meet it the way that, I was so thrilled to when I saw it at a festival?
Well, I remember talking to Linklater when it premiered at Venice. And that's sort of a do or die moment. You don't really know how a movie really plays. We really love the movie, but you don't know how people are
Venice is a tough audience. Famously, they're not always going to jump to their feet.
So we had no real clue on how it was going to be received. And when he was like calling me really enthusiastic, and just hearing Rick when he gets jazzed about anything, it's just the most wonderful, heartwarming thing. And that just showed that, again, we were always sort of the references, the movies that we really gravitated towards. The reason why a lot of the places that we pitched it to didn't really like it or want to make it was that it was sort of the kitchen sink of all these genres and things that we really liked. And it's hard to sell a kind of movie like that for a lot of places.
Yeah.
It's hard to justify
Yeah.
that kind of movie because they don't really know what it is. It's a bit of a feathered fish in sort of in the Hollywood terms. And that's sort of what the wonderful part about Venice and Toronto, London, Sundance. It's like really you got to see audiences go on that ride. And I feel
Yeah.
like it was justification for Netflix really coming in such a strong, wonderful way to really put it in front of as many eyeballs as possible, because audiences reacted to it like that you really saw a justification for pushing this thing in a way that was really incredible to see how Netflix showed up and really got audiences to for a movie that's sort of not a typical movie that I think would, play well with a lot of people. I think it was a really exciting moment. I was really proud of the whole team start to finish on how they put it out there.
Yeah. I mean, you guys have talked about kind of what you learned, or maybe just what you learned, because, Linklater's been doing this a long time, about bringing this movie around town and people being like, oh, we like this part, but not that part. Like, learning when to stand your ground on something, learning when to give in. Like, you've had this experience with this movie. It turned out great. But like, how have you taken that with you into what else you're making, even if you're just an actor? What did you learn about the business from that process?
Well, I think that experience really taught me that it's okay for people to disagree. Like, it's like everybody's got different favorite movies. Like, the world doesn't have to all want to be making the same movie. It would be so boring if that were the case. And I feel like Rick and I, thank goodness, we communicate really well together. And you always have, it's like, just like my sort of ride in Hollywood. Sometimes you have to look in the mirror and you're like, am I crazy, or do I just have to stick to my gut here? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I feel like that was sort of the case with this movie. Is Rick and I, after a lot of no's, we looked at each other and we were like, is this just not a movie that anybody except the two of us want to see? Or is this a movie that the business, the infrastructure and the sort of the way the business is designed is not designed to accept this business? We just have to show them what it is. Especially in script form, it you could just see the studio notes around it. Every time we showed it to someone, they saw potential and then they wanted to turn it into something else. And we were like,
yeah,
no, that's how it blends in. That's how you take all the magic out of it. And it kept happening over and over. And so again, it's just kind of trusting your gut. And I think like when you team up with a great filmmaker like Rick, from the get-go, we always agreed on what the good idea was. We would when we brainstorm and come up with stuff, and when we'd laugh and go, oh my God, that's great. We'd always agree on that idea. Sometimes our ways in terms of getting there was always different, but we'd always agree on what a good idea was, and we'd get excited about it. Just trusting that first instinct instead of letting the noise get in your head, trusting, do I want to see that movie? And that's what we just kept trusting the whole time. And I think that's one thing that I'm taking with me in terms of my career. It's just my gut. It's just, do I want to see this movie? And if I want to see this movie, if I feel like if I get jazzed about it, there's obviously an audience for it somewhere, so just go with that.
Yeah, your gut's now been proven correct. Some people follow their guts into disastrous results, but yours has been proven right now so that you can follow it. I talked to Kirsten Dunst a few weeks ago, and she was talking about how working with Sofia Coppola when she was really young kind of set her up for this sense of herself and sense of success in the business that she might not have had otherwise. And I know, when you worked on Fast Food Nation, you had not built this relationship with Richard Linklater that you have now. But I'm curious if that early exposure to that kind of filmmaker and the stuff watching him and watching him trust his gut, if that formed something for you, if that gave you a good baseline for making through this business, even though it took you a while to work together again.
Well, I think when you look at Richard Linklater, the joy he gets from being on a movie set is so special and it's so infectious. And he just loves building a movie and the collaboration and the team aspect of it. He's simultaneously so present and attentive and hardworking, and yet so not precious about it, knowing like there's more on the other side. Right. And I think that is a thing as an actor, what I've kind of taken from is like, this job is sort of split into two parts, which is like, you have to outwork everyone and you have to be disciplined and you have to be tenacious and you have to fight harder than anyone. And yet you also have to let go and realize this is a marathon, not a sprint. And if you really want to outlast in this business, you treat people well, you work hard, but you also know that there's going to be wins and losses. It's a large sine wave, this career at its best. The quicker the ascent, the quicker the descent. You have to kind of trust in the sort of ebbs and flows of it all. And watching Rick, he's like, that's what he's done. He's made some of my favorite films of all time, but he hasn't done them back to back to back. He's made them at different chapters in his career, and he's had wins and losses, but all of his movies are truthful, and they're all from such a wonderful place of really caring about cinema and the ideas he's putting out in the world. But again, he's aware of what he's putting out and also not precious about it. I think that's kind of a beautiful thing, just trusting that you're going to work hard to put stuff out. And one of my favorite things that's in my home in Austin is this thing that Rick wrote me right before Everybody Wants Them came out. And it basically says, separate the experience of making the movie from the experience of releasing the movie. They're two very different things. It's like you gotta hold with reverence and this feeling of what you created with other artists and what you wrote and just love that and protect that, because what you don't want is the box office, the reviews or whatever to affect the way you feel about making the movie, because making the movie is what we're all doing here. And then the releasing of it, if people love it, if people enjoy it, that can be its own victory lap and its own thing. But you can't let those things kind of cross-pollinate each other. And I think that's why he's been able to remain sane when a lot of people are driven, they have a success and then all of a sudden their sophomore movie doesn't do well and then they spiral out, they try to figure it out. And you can watch them unraveling because of how those things kind of affect each other. And Rick is just so steady in the idea that he just wants to keep making movies and he just keeps moving forward. And I think that's something I'll take. And that's why working with him at 14 years old, he's still working at such a high level. It's because he just loves it, and he's there for the right reason.
Do you remember when you got that in your head, the letting go of as I imagine when you first start making movies, you can't do that. It takes a while, right?
Look, it's a constant dance because, again, this is sort of the dance between commerce and art that we're in. I'm hyper aware that, there are investors in a movie. The movies don't just appear. This is a business enterprise and you have to make people their money back. And you have to look at how everyone is aligned, not only creatively, but financially. And then you have to look at the ideas that you're putting out there and do those ideas translate worldwide? Are those things supported in the way that you think they are? You have to be thinking foundationally about the movie you're making and not just go, yeah, let's make a big fun movie that costs $200 million. You have to understand, culturally, does that number support the movie that you're asking people to buy?
Yeah.
And
will they watch it in Japan is a real question.
100%. And you have to, that's how foreign sales work. That's how studios greenlight a movie. They sort of do their research and they ask all these different territories, does this movie sell here? And it's really fascinating because over the last little bit, I've learned a lot about how a movie is made and what their sort of risk assessment is going into it.
Yeah.
But I feel like for me, it's if you do discipline, for me is the key to happiness. If I try to educate myself on stuff, if I really work hard and I do the thing and I try to go in really educated about things and really protect my creative partners and protect my financial partners and really just go in eyes open, success or failure, I've showed up. At least I wasn't reckless with other people. And I wasn't reckless I wasn't reckless. And I think that's just, for me, that's how I can remain sane, is because you're never batting 1,000. The greatest actors in the business, you look at their career, you're lucky you get to make 80 movies, at the most.
Yeah.
And you look at most actors and their batting average is well below 2.5. Most people are hitting 25% at best, but you just go in as educated as you possibly can to do right by people that you're aligned with.
This is kind of a complicated question, so bear with. Like, we were talking about trusting your gut earlier and what you learn about, like, you know what's best for it. You can follow that. But you've also got this producer brain of doing right by your investors. So if your gut tells you this movie needs a $100 million car chase in it, then maybe your producer brain is telling you not. Like, where does that balance come in? Does that require you bouncing it off other people, or does that happen in your brain where you can kind of reconcile those two parts of yourself?
That's a great question. I mean, honestly, you know who is really helpful for me to see this was Jerry Bruckheimer. You know, working with him on Top Gun, Jerry always had this thing where he said, you know, just close your eyes and watch the movie, right? And for me, it's actually been a very interesting solve. If you go, hey, this is going to be a really expensive car chase, I try to close my eyes and I go, with visual effects, CGI, does this car chase have any impact, or do we have to do this the right and expensive way, right? Or is there a way to creatively shoot around some stuff and put more bang in our buck for a stunt that may be more effective for an audience? But really, at the end of the day, it's about the audience. Like, how are you affecting the audience? Where's that money going? And are you getting bang for your buck? So it's always cost value sort of propositions, even in stunts. Like, if you go, hey, we're going to wreck 25 cars on the stunts, you better shoot that shot in a way that justifies 25 cars blowing up. Right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What it is. But what you do need to do is you need to say, blowing up 25 cars with visual effects will have little to no effect on an audience, right? They do know the difference. But if you shoot it correctly and you do it practically, that could be the most thrilling, crazy shot of all time that changed the way your movie's seen. It could be a defining classic movie scene. You know, that may be the best money. That's what Mad Max
Fury Road was.
That's exactly
they spent so much money to make that happen and struggle, and it paid off.
That's exactly it. It's like when I watch Mad Max, that's like, you know, that's what was such a incredible feat of that movie is you watched people do it the hard way, but the right way. And it paid off in such an incredible sense. You saw artists go, I know this is not the shortest distance between 2 points, but in the end, if we pull this off, it's going to work for an audience. And that movie is a masterpiece. It's incredible for that reason.
Yeah.
So I take those sort of things into account too, because you can't just be pinching pennies, because that doesn't lead to the right audience reaction either, right? You have to just go, where are we spending money? And again, I learned that from Cruise. You know, it's like when you spend, where you spend and how that's going to affect an audience. So it's like, I'm trying to just take lessons from all these wonderful people that I'm getting a chance to work with.
Yeah. Well, honestly, when you go on your Wikipedia, it has like, ask Denzel Washington for advice on an agent, ask Sylvester Stallone for advice. It sounds like that you've been at least according to Wikipedia, you can tell me if they have it wrong. It sounds like you've been a sponge like that for a long time.
Yeah. Cause I mean, looking even at, you know, it's been the real benefit of having like a slow burn in this town is when no one's really noticing you, you get a chance to be invisible in the room. There's no stakes. You just get to observe. Point. You know what I mean? When you're like, you know, on Expendables, I don't know what I was like 15 on the call sheet or whatever it is, you know, but I'm there every day with these guys. Yeah. You know, and I'm getting to watch my heroes work, right? And I'm getting to watch Sylvester Stallone, who is a guy that has such extraordinary willpower and is a real artist. Like, you know, talking with him, like we would talk about, you know, how he came up with Expendables and these sort of Western archetypes and how he designed the movie and what different characters represent. And these are not accidents. He's put a lot of thought in these things. He's a businessman. He's an artist. He's all those different things. But yeah, I think that's the other thing that I feel very grateful in this moment about is that it's happening now when I have a chance not only to appreciate it, but to have a little bit of some education under my belt to not waste it.
Perspective, which is you can't get that any other way. We have to get close to wrapping up, but so you've spent a lot of this year promoting the movies that you've been making, all the, you know, the hard work you put into it, and you were just saying you've basically got another year where you're going to be on set. Does that feel like a balance? Are you kind of relieved to be like retreating back to the set to go actually? I know you like press and you've talked about making it fun, but it sounds like this is maybe an important reset moment.
I think it is an important reset moment. I think there's, you know, and I even told my family and my team, I was just like, because talking about what you've made is fun, but I really like being in the trenches of it. I love, it's just a different part of your brain. I just don't think you should exist there too long. What you've done and the interpretation of it, all that stuff, it's fine. But sometimes you just want to send your babies out into the world and just sort of let people enjoy them.
Yeah.
And for me, like the happiest place you'll see me is on set, like with other people trying to figure it out. And so I'm just really grateful that, this year, really for this next calendar year, I'm really getting to live on a movie set, which is awesome. So I'm really happy.
I'm going to go ask all the grips for advice and then come back with a whole new perspective on the business.
It's true. I mean, even, what's great though, is that's the other thing is I'm getting to work with these great filmmakers, and great filmmakers surround themselves with great department heads. So that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm getting to talk to all these people and it's just film school for me. I'm just getting to be in film school right now. And I'm really just, again, try to be a sponge, like try to do this right. But when you're surrounded by the smartest people in the business, why would you not?
Yeah, I mean, Edgar Wright is such a fountain of knowledge about the entirety of Hollywood history. Like that's an opportunity you don't waste.
We do movie nights like every weekend. It's like our days off. I'll go to Edgar's house and we'll watch a movie at night, and I'll watch a movie with him tonight. And literally, it's just the best. It's the best. He loves movies so much and he cares about it so much. And the way we get to break things down. When I first moved out to LA, he was literally, I wrote a list of directors that I wanted to work with, and Edgar was at the top. He's been one of my favorite filmmakers for a long time. And he's just lived up to all of it. He's just such a great guy, such an incredible filmmaker. And what we're getting to build on Running Man here is really going to be extraordinary. Very excited.
Yeah. Merry Christmas to you all. This show is edited by Brett Fuchs and co-produced by Brett Fuchs and me. Our theme music is by Dave Gonzalez. Thanks again to my co-host, Richard Lawson. Get the Prestige Junkie newsletter by going to theankler.com and subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It's a holiday week, but we will still be back next week.